Hi everyone, Heather here with the California Afterschool Network, and I'm joined by Michael Funk from the California Department of Education. And thank you for joining us today in our series of virtual fireside chats. We're also very excited today to be joined by a couple folks from Oakland Unified School District. So we have Curtiss Sarikey, who's Chief of Staff, and Martha Pena, who is the Afterschool Programs Coordinator. So welcome to both of you. Very excited to have you on talking about what you've been doing in your district. But before we jump into conversation with you, Michael, we have some more updates. As usual, guidance came out this week from the California Department of Public Health, which has generated quite a few questions in my inbox, so I know probably a lot in yours. So I'm gonna pull up the FAQs on the screen in a moment and turn it over to you to talk about what these mean.
Thank you, and welcome Curtiss and Martha, and thanks for the introductions, Heather, and for hosting today. So let me just say, it's been a week that I thought the release of guidance from the California Department of Public Health, CDPH is what we'll call it from here on out. The CDPH guidance would actually bring some settledness across the state, and I can tell you why in just a minute. But there's actually another document released on the same day from the California Department of Social Services around licensing and non-exempt programs, childcare programs, that has caused a lot of confusion. And hopefully we will settle some of this. Also pending this week is Senate Bill 820, which is a more updated version of the budget trailer bill, which will amend some language that was, or add some language to SB 98. I'll cover that briefly as well. So for context, so you're all aware that the governor announced weeks ago that for counties on the watch list, that the county public health officials would have to grant a waiver for elementary schools to be open for in-person instruction. And then the county State Department of Public Health said they wouldn't even consider waivers for counties where the COVID rate is above 200 per 1,000 people. No, 100,000, I'm sorry. Anyway, so that's caused a lot of conversation, confusion. The conversation about waivers, well, do expanded learning programs need waivers? Then we released guidance, the COVID frequently asked questions guidance that we negotiated with the Department of Finance that actually specifically said, even if a campus is closed for in-person instruction, that the campus can be open for certain services, serving certain children that have acute needs as they participate in distance learning while following certain guidelines, serving school-age children of critical infrastructure workers, even those that may come from outside your district is allowable. And we walked through that on this fireside chat more than once, and that's on our CDE website. But let me say that even though we said it's permissive, and we negotiated that permissiveness with the Department of Finance and also consulted with the governor's office, that was inconsistent county by county, because we consistently said it's permissive, but it's a local decision. And then a lot of questions came up. Well, whose decision is it locally? And does a county public health official need to approve this, or do they need to be consulted? What we know for sure is that the local educational agency, the LEA, has to approve it. And to what extent do they consult with the county public health officials? What I can tell you, and what I've said on this fireside chat before, is that varied greatly county by county by county. And I could tell you very specific concrete examples, but it's just know that there are counties where the county public health official said no one's going to be on campus. There are counties where the public official said, yes, we'll entertain waivers to open elementary schools for in-person instruction. There are county public health officials that told the County Office of Education that yes, we will allow cohorts of children to come onto campus under these conditions. So we thought the State Department of Public Health, CDPH, issuing their guidance this week would bring some settledness to that and so maybe some consistency. And Heather, what you've pulled up on the screen is actually not the guidance itself, but it's the frequently asked questions related to the guidance that specifically deal with K-12 education. And the guidance predominantly is really clear. It's cohorts of 14 children, up to 2 staff, no more than 2 staff connected to the 14 children. Those groups cannot intermingle or intermix. It's not 14 kids at the same time. It's 14 humans assigned to up to 2 adults. That's it. So if 6 of those humans come in the morning, then 8 can come in the afternoon. But you can't have 6 in the morning and 10 in the afternoon. So it's not just a broad ratio of 2 to 14. It's 14 children specifically identified that don't change. And when they come can vary, but it's those 14 with 1 or up to 2 adults. And then all types of guidance in terms of how many cohorts can be created in a school. The guidance is not more than 25% of the school's enrollment. That's not a firm rule, that is guidance. The 14 to 2 is a firm rule. But I think it's a pretty clear document. But what I want to just point out is this particular section. Does the cohorting guidance apply to K-12 school settings? Yes. The cohorting guidance authorizes small group in-person services in controlled, supervised, and indoor environments, such as those operated by a local educational agency. The cohorting guidance applies to schools that cannot reopen for in-person instruction pursuant to the July 17 framework, including elementary schools in those jurisdictions that have not received an elementary school waiver. This is from the County Public Health through the local public health office. Under these circumstances, school officials should develop and implement plans in collaboration with local health officials and school-based staff, including, if applicable, organized labor, but are not required to receive express approval from the local health department. They are, however, required to adhere to any applicable and more restrictive local public health directive. The reason this is so important to cover is this question of whether a local public health official had to approve this, for example. So this says it in black and white what the conditions are. And as we were saying, we were hoping that this would bring some clarity to this. Of course, locally, it's for communities and school districts and school officials and the county health people to apply what they feel comfortable with. We have said all along that there are clearly social justice issues here, that there are clearly children, groups of populations of students who will not thrive, even come close to thriving in a distance learning environment. There are students that need specific resources, kids with IEPs and kids with who are English learners, kids in foster care, kids who are experiencing homelessness. This is why this policy was created, to support those populations of children. And as I've said many times before, if we're not doing all we can, if we're not doing all that's possible to support those children, then it's a moral issue and it's a social justice issue. We have to do all we can to support these kids. And by the way, there is a section of this guidance that does state that in addition to the 2 to 14 ratio, individual children can receive one-on-one support, therapeutic support, maybe speech therapy, occupational therapy. They can receive those therapies in a safe, socially distanced fashion outside of the 2 to 14 ratio. So I think that's enough on that. But now what kind of threw some fun into the mix is on the same day, I'm going to share my screen. This is my fancy Zoom skills. Department of Social Services Provider Information Notice 2022 CCP, which talks about license and license exempt child care provision. It's a huge document, but it does specifically mention after-school education and safety. And one of the reasons why it's confusing is because there are many of you watching this Fireside chat who operate licensed and ACES programs separately. And so you're reading this guidance from the Department of Social Service carefully because you run the license program. And then it gets confusing. Well, now does this apply to ACES? Now do I have to apply for a waiver if I'm going to run the ACES? Because ACES is license exempt. All these nuances come in. What I want to say is we're still figuring out some of the nuances of this, and we need to be in touch with the Department of Social Services. But what I can tell you, what has not changed is our guidance never uses the word childcare. License exempt childcare is different than an ACES program serving school-age children of critical infrastructure workers. So our guidance has not changed. If you are serving school-age children of critical infrastructure workers from within or without your district, there's no waiver for you to apply for. You simply have to get the permission and work with the local educational agency and your county public health officials. I hope that's clear. There is a section of education code that we've had FAQs about for a long time. It's Education Code 8484.3 that does say if your program operates more than 60 hours a week, or if a child comes more than 30 hours, then that's the limit to the license exempt status of an ACES funded program. So let me just say, if you're in a situation where your program you think is going to operate more than 60 hours a week, or you're going to have children, I don't mean one child occasionally, but if you're going to have children coming more than 30 hours per week, then be in touch with us here at CDE and we'll help you walk through that. We're not going to take a blanket approach for this statewide, for this Fireside chat to cover that. I apologize for all of the in the weeds, but I hope that information is helpful for you. And now and lastly, the Budget Trailer Bill SB 820 should be voted on this week. There are two other sections of Ed Code that we have waived that are somewhat technical. I am not able to go over what those sections are because we firmly, like 99.9% believe that those things have been agreed upon by legislative staff and the Governor's Office, Department of Finance, that they will go through. But until the bill is voted on and passed, it's best that I don't talk about the specifics. But they're not going to provide any major shifts to the guidance we've already provided. So with that in mind, one of the things that has been popular and helpful is to bring on leadership from communities and school districts who have really taking visionary and bold approaches to the role of expanded learning in the educational work that they're doing, supporting their communities and children. And a few weeks ago, of course, I've known Curtiss and Martha for some time, and they've done amazing work, and so glad you're on. But in a conversation I had just a week and a half, 2 weeks ago with Curtiss, he was telling me about the depth of engagement of the leadership at the highest level of the district and how deeply collaborative they worked with Martha and her team to develop strategies for the reopening of school. So Curtiss, I'm going to pass it to you. Just welcome and tell us a little bit about what's been going on over the last several weeks in terms of your planning.
Yeah, thank you, Michael. Thank you, Heather, for having us. I'm most happy to be here with Martha just because she's really been leading extraordinary work around our out of school time and expanded learning work in Oakland. And I'll just start a little bit from the beginning and then work into the last 3 weeks. Part of the reason why I believe Oakland has, been situated to actually, kind of have a common understanding and a real, buy-in, this ownership around the importance of the entire community wrapping around kids is because a decade ago, we put a stake in the ground and said we're going to be the first full-service community school district in the country, which meant what does it actually look like to serve the whole child from the classroom to the boardroom? And so over those 10 years, we've developed both at the practice and the policy level a way of us understanding and operationalizing what that looks like. And after school programs have been a cornerstone of that work from the very beginning. In fact, a launch pad of really the work we've done in community schools over the last decade. So the after school programs in Oakland have never been a second thought. They've never been something that's been off to the side that we think about once in a while. We've thought about the seamless school day, and we've thought about how the importance of both the community school provider as well as the daytime provider, what's the added value of both to really create this whole thing that adds up to something really meaningful for kids. We've always seen our lead agencies and our after school providers as those community, cultural ambassadors, linguistic ambassadors. We know that our staff at many of these programs actually, grew up in the communities in which, for the kids that they're actually serving. So none of this has ever been taken for granted. It's been, I think, explicit in our system that there is just enormous asset and value in the out of school time providers and what it means for our kids' lives at many levels. And many of our after school lead agencies, they provide multiple services in their community as well. So they not only know our students and families because of what they do with us in the schools, but they also do other community services, whether that be mental health, other types of summer programs, family services, workforce development types of programs. And so, these are organizations that have deep roots in Oakland. So I just wanted to set the context that, when COVID came along, many of the things that we needed to respond to around food security, around inequities, around the digital divide, around accessing our community partners, I think in some ways just really baked into the DNA around how we operate as a school district. And so I wanted to name that. And so on our board, and our superintendents really, we actually pulled together our COVID action team, a huge task force of well over 100 people with both site staff, parents, community members, after school lead agency folks to really say, like, how are we going to reopen school on August 10th and do it in a really high quality way. The out of school time providers and the work that Martha's leading were an integral part of that, like developing those plans. We call them strong start plans for every school. Our board took a keen interest just, knowing that in a community like Oakland, where upwards of 75% of our kids are on free and reduced lunch, we have one of the largest newcomer populations in the state. And we have many, just all of the inequities that were there, but revealed ever more so during COVID. Came up that, rightly so, their first and ongoing concern has been how are we making sure that we're connecting with our most vulnerable students. So kids that enrolled but didn't show up to registration, or kids that registered and even with the device might not be logging on for a variety of reasons. And so, this really, spurred this idea of like, how are we really going to make sure that the after school providers are working hand in glove with our site leaders to develop plans to make sure that all of our kids are connected, both to distance learning, but also the services to each other, to their teachers. Just that the powerful thing, that relationship is still central to what we do, whether it's in the virtual environment or what it was, pre-COVID. And so, that's really the way that we thought about it. We even had a meeting with a few board members, our superintendent, with a number of our lead agencies. Martha was there to actually have a discussion about what does this actually look like on the ground. We're able to really hear from the out of school providers what types of things that they were thinking about doing, planning with Martha and her team. So I think like just that interaction alone, because it was very much a topic of discussion at board meetings, and the board knowing that these organizations are just vital parts of Oakland's landscape, period, and a key part of what the Oakland, learning experience has been like for our kids. And so, that's really what we led to. And I think, Martha can speak way more specifically to like what the seamless school day kind of looks like in the virtual environment, and how we've redirected and, brought in the wisdom of our out of school providers along with the wisdom of our site folks to actually say, hey, here's how we need to create, the best possible learning environments for our kids. And Martha, I guess I forgot, Mike, you told me to hand it off to Martha. But I was like, oh, you're the MC. But I'll hand it over to Martha to kind of just talk more about, what that actually looks like on the ground and what some of those plans might look like at the school site level.
That was just a typical Zoom moment, that
I know.
we're all good.
Thank you, Curtis, and thank you, Michael and Heather, for having us. I'm always excited to come and share OUSD stories and the amazing work that we're doing here in Oakland. Like many providers and districts, when COVID-19 happened, there was no game plan. There was no, history around how to navigate this type of situation. And a lot of our after-school team, we really went all in on this. And this is where we excelled in being flexible and open. Our communications with our families really shined through this time. This is the relationships that our after-school team had with our communities and our families and our students really helped elevate the work that was happening during distance learning. And so through the first, I want to say 8 to 9 weeks, there was a lot of learning that happened around what worked and what didn't work. There were 2 models that kind of came out of the first couple of weeks of COVID-19. Like many districts and many organizations, our after-school staff, hit the road running with supporting meal distribution, supporting communication with families, doing wellness checks, delivering food, doing technology checks and making sure that our students were logging in. But at the same time, what we saw happening were these 2 program models, where one was kind of like a duplicate of the after-school program, where a lot of our agencies designed their own online content and the instructors were online from 3 to 6 to support kids. They distributed supplies and materials, and that was great. But there was also the second model that kind of came out organically through this work. And I want to say that a lot of it stemmed from the work that we did with 360, 365 and the whole day, whole child initiative, where there was a lot of work that went into creating these relationships between school day staff and after school staff. So when COVID-19 happened, principals and teachers were reaching out to their after school partners because they already had that pre-existing relationship and asking, I need help with my Zoom meeting. Can you work with these students one-on-one to do literacy intervention? And so there was a lot more intentional integration happening during the school day and a lot more intentional support systems. What we saw come out of these 2 models was there's a lot more attendance associated with programs that were integrated into the school day. And we saw the same pattern in the summer. And so when we were discussing, okay, we're going to go back August 10th, what is our partnership going to look like? And we even had convenings all summer long with our after school lead agencies. Here in Oakland, we have 75 after school programs. We partner with 12 after school providers. Each one is very different. Each one has their own school culture, their own needs. So for us to design a plan that could fit the needs of all of these groups, it just wasn't feasible. But what was feasible was for us to create a framework for them to sit down and have these conversations with their principals to discuss what are your needs. So what we designed was a revised scope of work plan for after-school providers to sit down with their site leadership team, their principal, their community school managers, their quality support coaches, to really plan out what the integration was going to look like. And then on the district side, with the Strong Start plans that Curtis had mentioned, we created a space in those Strong Start plans where principals were instructed to meet with their after-school providers. So for the first time, we made space for them to have these conversations. We're always talking about, making sure that expanded learning has a seat at the table. Well, we were able to do that through this process. And what's come out of it is this intentional integration with the school day. And it looks very different from school to school. At some school sites, we have after-school staff going into the classroom and providing 30 minutes of mindfulness or a 30-minute enrichment component while the teacher takes a break or works with other students on a specific lesson plans. We're also doing academic support alongside teachers who are able to sit down with their after-school team and really share what their needs are, and the after-school partners are able to really step up and support their teachers. We're doing all of this work in collaboration with our after-school providers, and we're hearing from our principals how much they appreciate having this additional support during these difficult times. We have, some principals have shared, like, they're out there distributing foods to our students. They're out there driving, taking laptops and hotspots to make sure that our kids are able to log in. There's just so much amazing work happening on the ground. And it was because we were able to create a space for after-school providers to have a seat at the table during the planning process. In addition to that, OUSD is granting all of our after-school teams OUSD emails, which give them access to all of the resources that are available to our teachers. So now that not only are they integrated in the school system, but they're also integrated into the district system. So this has just been a huge shift in the way that we've been working alongside our community partners. And we're starting to see it. And all the work that we tried to do through the 365 and W3 is actually happening now naturally, organically during this time. There's collaboration, there's integration, there's the seamlessness happening. And it's the whole child being supported through all of these different support systems. And it's really exciting to see.
That's very powerful, Marta. I wanted to interject something and then ask you a question.
Sure.
So for those that don't know, 360, 365 was a statewide collaborative it had a collaborative of many different agencies, and that was supporting the whole child 360 365 days a year. And part of that process was a community of practice, which engaged several districts, one of which was Oakland Unified, to bring cross-disciplinary teams 2 or 3 times a year to spend a whole day. And by cross-departmental teams, expanded learning would come with curriculum and instruction, would come with student support services, would come with an administrator, and plan together, how are we going to really build a culture of social emotional support and development for our children. So and I had a chance to be part of many of those meetings and to sit with the Oakland team many times and know of the really authentic work that you've done, and how that's really paying off now is very inspiring. Who would have thunk, right?
Yeah,
So,
and to hear from principals who were part of the project that because they had that relationship and that connection with their after school staff, they didn't think twice to reach out, versus principals or communities that were not part of that. They were just like, what do I do? Who do I talk to? So it was really great to see. It's like, oh my God, we did something. We
yeah. So many of you don't know that before I came to the department a little over 8 years ago, I was, in addition to operating one of the beacon centers in San Francisco, I was actually one of the providers in Oakland and worked closely with Oakland Unified, and especially along the Fruitvale corridor, had a lot of different programs and some in other parts of town, but spent a lot of time in principals' offices having these conversations. Sometimes some of those conversations felt transactional, like a little bit of a negotiation, like, give me what I want, what can you give me for the dollar? And sometimes they felt very transformative and very much child-centered. Can you just speak to what approach either of you, and this, I just want to say this notion of giving expanded learning staff Oakland Unified emails, I don't want to miss that point. That's an example of both a symbolic and a very concrete symbol of real partnership. But tell me about, what helps the principal and the expanded learning staff, after school staff, come together and not just check the box and say we came together as part of our strong start plan.
Yeah, you know, at times it feels like we're building the plane as we're flying it. And this is one of those moments. There were 75 sites is a lot. And each site is very different. And for some principals, you're right, it's very transactional. And so we wanted to step in and really change that conversation. And our program managers, we have an amazing team of 3 program managers who are on the ground, sitting in on these meetings and really pushing the conversation to that point where it can be, transformational. And for a lot of the principals, they were just not aware that this was a possibility. For them, this is the first time they're having these genuine conversations with their after school team, because for many of them, after school was after school, school day was school day. But now when we put forth the integration plan, like this is your revised scope of work, how are you going to utilize your after school resources to ensure that we're reaching every child, that every child's needs are being met, whether it's through literacy or through food or through technology. For principals, they're like, this is amazing. This was the first time that they were, they were able to sit down and have these types of conversations with their after school teams.
And I'm hearing you, there were very clear structural decisions
Yes.
that made the space for that, as opposed to a site coordinator trying to get the attention. There was an institutional framework that allowed for that relationship to emerge. I know we're getting to the end of our time, Heather, but I'm just going to toss it to Curtiss for any other thoughts before we go back to Heather.
No, I just was just stuck, Michael, on something you said about like the tactical versus the transformational. And, I think every transformational move, you have to deal with the tactical too. It's like a both and. And, we're lucky in Oakland that in addition to ACEs in 21st Century, that we have a partnership with the city's office of the OFCY office that augments our after school programs with additional dollars. And so, it's kind of the Maslow's hierarchy. Sometimes you got to take care of a few of the transactional pieces so people can, come in with a different mental model around how to be transformational in the work. And so if you can't kind of put food on the table, if you can't, maybe even make payment to your baseline staff to do great work, it's a little bit more challenging to get to the transformational conversations. And so, I think part of like developing that structure is holding a space where you can put both things on the table. Like, yes, we are actually trying to reimagine and do something extraordinary for kids under really trying situation. And we want to memorialize some of these lessons so that we're actually a better system when we come out the other end of COVID. Like, what are we going to grab from? Like, how do we memorialize what Martha just mentioned around those structures, around how after school providers and principals are planning around their kids and their community? That has to stay. That can't, like, okay, we did it for August 10th. And now when we open up next year, we come back to another model, we're going to do something, we're going to go back to the old way. And so, to me, that's the transformational part, is how do we like take all these inequities that have been laid bare? We're doing things really different to try to address them. And now we actually have to start codifying these things in real practices so that when we move forward, we've actually become a better system and for kids. And I think that's really like the next step around the work, is having those explicit conversations, because that is actually transformational.
That's great. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you both, Curtiss and Martha. I've learned a lot in a short amount of time, and we are coming to our close, but I do want to offer just a brief moment for you to kind of share a final thought. You all have some amazing foundations with the full service community school districts, the 360, 365 work, everything else you mentioned that's really allowed you to kind of move into this space. But we know a lot of our other districts don't necessarily have that same foundation. So as you're thinking about other districts and how they might move this work forward, if you both would like to maybe share just one piece of advice, either from the after school side or the district side. So,
I can start. I mean, I would just say, you know, Oakland in some ways looks like California. And if you look at who our students are across the state, that we owe it to our kids, a state made up largely of Black and brown students, and an extraordinary level of low-income students in a very wealthy state, to do the transformational work that Michael mentioned for our kids. And so I guess just the one thing is, you know, just for us to be mindful and intentional about what we're doing, and to really be thinking about not just the immediate crisis and the immediate response, but sustained long-term change to actually start to get better results for the kids that need it the most.
I think for me is being open to making mistakes and having and reaching out to your principals. Again, for us, a lot of our community only looked at after school as the after school team. They didn't see the possibilities. And there's still a lot of fear around, can we do this? Can we not do this? And being able to have those meetings with principals, and also just be willing to, you know, reimagine what our after school communities can do. And I think for me, that's been one of our biggest aha, is just being comfortable with not knowing.
Yeah, I know we're out of time, but Michael, I gotta say one really quick last thing, because you named it. I mean, I think one thing that this entire pandemic has shown around the country is that schools and educators are absolutely essential to the health and well-being of communities across the country. And I think similarly, when you think about the role of community-based organizations and the out-of-school time folks, that it's similarly raised the awareness that this is not a side business. This is actually front and center and absolutely critical to how we educate children. And so I think, like, raising that bar, that we actually have to, like, you know, include both, this is what Martha exactly said, the principal and the lead agencies working together on behalf of kids, and that actually, again, like, it raised that awareness. And so how do we capture that and make sure that that prominence for the work of the after school community is maintained, and that we think about all the structures that we've learned about to make sure that that's operationalized going forward.
Awesome. Well, thank you both so much for joining us today, but also just the amazing work you're doing in your community. Much appreciation to you both. And thank you all for joining us for another Fireside Chat, and we'll keep bringing you more of these conversations. And so I'll turn it over to Michael to close this out.
Well, all I can say is amen to both of you. I mean, I like to close out each one of these by an admonition for all of us to lead with love and take this great flexibility that we've given you with great responsibility. And I know both of you as humans, and I know that you do lead with heart and lead with love. It's behind everything you've said. And sometimes people think, well, that's kind of soft, lead with love. But no, love means action, taking action the way you've described it so beautifully. And I don't need to repeat it, but I just want to amplify that so much. And I just so you know, Heather and I have mapped out a schedule through Thanksgiving for the Fireside Chats. And we're going to be looking at maybe trying in a few weeks to do an actual live Fireside Chat, to invite everyone in the state, which will also be recorded and can be watched later, but also something that's interactive statewide. So anyway, lots of exciting things ahead. It is a challenging time. It is so disruptive in so many areas of our lives. We're all feeling that sense of unsettledness. Chip Connolly wrote just a couple weeks ago the difference between settled and unsettled, and sometimes unsettled is exactly what we need to be able to move in and do something different, like you've done in Oakland. So thank you so much. Curtiss and Marta and Heather, thank you again for hosting, and lead with love. See you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you.